All right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar updates to secondary education in the UK, GCSEs, and A levels. Let me get to the next slide here. So your presenters today are Leslie Clausen-Eicher, Associate Director at Acro International.
Hey everyone.
All right, and then we also have joining us all the way from London, Colette Sturzaker, Head of Individual Services Group at the UK NERIC.
Hi everyone. For those of you who aren't sure what UK NARIC is, we are the National Agency and Recognition Information Centre in the UK. So we compare overseas qualifications for individuals and also for members, and we perform this function on behalf of the UK government. So we work alongside the Department for Education and the Home Office here in the UK.
All right, thank you for that clarification. So before we start with the actual presentation, just want to go over some logistics. Based on the number of people we have attending right now, we'll probably just do questions via the actual questions feature in your webinar dashboard. So if you do have a question at any point, feel free to submit it through there, and I will assign those to the presenters as we see fit, and we'll address them in the last 10 minutes. So around 10:50 or 11:50 rather Eastern time, we'll start that. We also, just as a fair warning, we have some fire alarm testing going on in my office here. So while the presenters will be fine, hopefully it's all finished and we don't have to worry about it. But if you hear some sirens blaring, I sincerely apologize. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Leslie. All right, Leslie, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Mike, for the intros, and thank you to everyone who's logged into our webinar today. Before we get started, I wanted to point out, just in case everyone is clear, that the UK is comprised of England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. Okay? We'll be talking mainly about England, Wales, and Northern Ireland today. One thing to be aware of when you're looking at education in the UK is that there is really no such thing as a quote-unquote UK system. There are differences across England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. Those first three, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, have more in common in terms of the titles of the awards, but there are some differences between them, and these have become more defined since the recent reforms. Scotland is different, and Colette will briefly look at Scotland at the end of this presentation. So to set the stage for discussing changes to secondary education in the UK, I'm going to lay out the way that British secondary education is structured really in general. It's important to learn general characteristics of the UK ed system because it forms one of the main educational models on which many other countries' education systems are based. So the education structure that you see in front of you now is primarily for England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Scotland has many similar general characteristics, but it differs in credential names and number of years of study. So today we'll be talking primarily about England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Colette will touch briefly on Scotland, like I said, toward the end of the presentation. So to set the stage here, I think one of the most important things that I find about British education is that it's a system of external examinations. This means that the school curriculum is taught in schools by teachers, but students must pass externally administered exams to obtain recognized leaving certificates that allow them to continue their studies. Remember that part about external exams because it's probably the most important characteristic of British education. International credential evaluators talk about the British secondary system as being an 11+2 system. That means that there is an exit point with a credential at each level. So for secondary school, students can exit after year 11 or 2 years later after year 13. So turning to the chart now, you see that 11 years of school, roughly at age 14 through 16, students sit for the GCSE, or General Certificate of Secondary Education. This is a leaving credential, meaning students can exit school after that. With the GCSE, students can go on to post-secondary vocational study or employment. Just a historical note for you, the GCSE was known in the past as GCE ordinary levels or O levels, and you actually still kind of hear that. After the GCSE, if you want to go on to university study, you have to continue. Students go on after that year 11 GCSE exam to a sixth form college. At the sixth form, students can they generally study for 2 years, and then after year 13, they sit for their GCE advanced level examinations. Universities generally require 3 GCE A levels for admission to bachelor's degree programs. Something new, or newish, is actually a credential at year 12 or after year 12 called GCE Advanced Subsidiary Levels. Students can take these after studying for 1 year in the sixth form. And in the US, we consider AS levels as kind of half of an A level. So US university administrators generally recommend up to a year sequence for a full A level and a semester for half of an A level, or that advanced subsidiary level. So after 11 plus 2, GCSEs and A levels, students go on to study for what is usually a 3-year bachelor's degree. We're only focusing on secondary education in this webinar, but I wanted to point out that the 3-year bachelor's degree is something that comes after 13 years of education in the UK. So 13 plus 3 equals 16. And in the US, 12 plus 4 equals 16. And that's why we consider the UK bachelor's degree to be comparable to a US bachelor's degree. We're counting years. One little note about the names of the credentials. That 11-year credential, the General Certificate of Secondary Education, in other countries where the British secondary school curriculum is being offered, so for instance, we'll call out Pakistan, for instance, you might see that 11-year certificate still called ordinary levels. So don't be shocked if you see ordinary levels. Those aren't offered in the UK anymore, but they are offered in places that offer the UK system. In contrast to the United States, the UK has a national secondary curriculum, which includes academic subjects as well as religious and sex education. A national curriculum ensures that all children are learning the same body of knowledge and attaining the same standards in the same subjects. Academies in private schools, on the other hand, don't have to follow the national curriculum, but they still teach a broad curriculum. And that's primarily, like I said, because the UK system is a system based on external exams, and all students are generally preparing for those external leaving exams. So just to drill down a little bit into that national curriculum, the stages that we as US administrators are typically dealing with are stages 3 and 4. And you can see on this slide how they're broken out. Generally, stages 3 and 4 extend from age 11 to about age 16. And that's where kids will then take that 11-year exam, the GCSE. If you're interested in what those exam subjects are, you can see here the compulsory exams at both levels, stage 3 and stage 4, are English, mathematics, and science. So you see that. And then there are additional academic subjects that students must take. Now, I wanted to point out for US admissions officers, it's important to remember that the GCSE is the admissions credential for US university admissions. The GCSE is the credential on which you should be basing your admissions decision. You should always require your UK applicants to submit GCSEs. Colette will show you some GCSEs later in this presentation, but for now, remember that US admissions offices are typically looking for subject breadth in the GCSEs, and that would include language, mathematics, lab science, social science, and a fifth academic subject. Okay. So just a note about examination boards. They are the ones who administer those external examinations that I keep talking about. There are 6 exam boards that administer GCSEs and AS and A levels in England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. It is common practice that your UK educated applicants will come to you with more than one GCSE certificate from more than one exam board. The reason for that is the exam boards offer curriculums, they write the exam questions, and they grade the examinations. The school's part in this is to choose which curriculum from which exam board will be offered at their school. So for instance, a school might choose to use the Edexcel biology curriculum, but the English curriculum from OCR. Edexcel and OCR are 2 different exam boards. So if a student had taken exams from both of those exam boards, they will come to you with an exam certificate for each of those. Okay? It's not the case that a UK student would come with a consolidated transcript like we have in the United States. So some interesting facts about the GCSE. Like I said before, students take these exams after year 11, and that's typically at ages 14 to 16. You can expect to see usually 8 to 10 GCSE subjects. And like I pointed out before, math, English language, and science are compulsory. These exams are offered in May or June timeframe, and for resits, a student could take them in November. So if a student failed an exam or wanted to improve their grade, they could sit for those November examinations. Some facts about advanced and advanced subsidiary levels. Colette will touch on this more later, but students enroll in a school, college, or sixth form center for 1 or 2 years in preparation for those AS or A-level exams. Okay? So AS level exams would be taken after completion of 1 year of sixth form, and they're considered to be half the size of a full A-level. A-level exams are taken after completion of the 2nd year. So in that first year of study in the sixth form, students can choose to study up to 6 subjects and take as many examinations. But in the 2nd year, students generally specialize and only take 1, 2, or 3 A-level exams. Okay? That's because universities require 3 A-levels for admission. Sometimes really excellent students might take 4, but it's very common and standard for students to come to you with only up to 3 A-level exams. Finally, a note about getting documentation. Replacement certificates can't be issued. So the certificate that the student possesses is their only copy. But they can request a certified statement of results to be sent to you directly from the examination board. Something more common even is that exam boards provide verification to universities, but not to students. Students need to sign a declaration form, like a privacy form, authorizing you to receive that. So now that you understand the structure of British secondary education, Colette's going to share some recent changes with you. Colette, take it away.
Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, and before I start talking about the recent changes in the UK education system, and the reforms, I just want to build upon what Leslie has explained. Just make sure that I've got control of the PowerPoint here. Great. One thing to bear in mind when we consider the key differences between education in the UK and education in the US is that the UK system favours depth and the US system favours breadth. So in the UK, students are first required to reduce the number of subjects they study by about half, and they do this roughly at the age of 14, and then they're expected to halve them again at 16. So by 18, when students in the UK head off to university, they've usually reduced their subjects down to just one or one specialist area. So to give you my own personal example, when I was around 14, 15, I chose to study, I had to study the core GCSE subjects that Leslie has mentioned, so English, maths and science. And then on top of that, I chose to study French, Spanish, geography and music. So choosing my favourite subjects, but still allowing for that breadth across the curriculum at that level. And then at 16, so going into A level, I had to narrow down the subjects again, and I chose Spanish, French and media studies. And then by the time I went off to university, I just went off to study Spanish. So that's to give you an example of how in the UK, we're constantly narrowing down the number of subjects in order to gain more specialist knowledge in a specific area. So by the time UK students arrive at university in that first year, they're already kind of mini specialists in the subjects they have chosen or the specific subject area that they've chosen. So by the time they arrive, they already have quite in-depth knowledge of that subject. And at university, all the modules studied relate in some way to the specific subject or subject area that the student has chosen to study. So it's very different to the US system. I understand that in the US, breadth is a really important feature throughout secondary school and American bachelor degree programs. And many students are required to complete general education courses and introductory courses in a number of subjects, in addition to courses related to the major. In the UK, it's all about the major. We just focus on that one specific subject that we've chosen to study right from the beginning. So it's important to bear this in mind when you're trying to compare qualifications from the UK to the US system, because obviously our systems are very, very different. So onto the recent reforms. Here are some headlines from about a decade ago, before these reforms were put in place. And we're talking now about the Education Act of 2011. The Education Bill was introduced into the House of Commons in 2011, and it received royal assent later that year. Royal assent basically means that the Queen has to approve all of our laws and bills, so the Queen has to give all plans a go-ahead before they can come into place in the UK. And the Education Act of 2011 was an important step in implementing the government's education reform programme and helping to create an education system that delivered higher education standards for all. It was felt that the reforms were needed because GCSEs and A-levels had, for some, become too easy. That is to say that the way in which they were assessed using coursework and using kind of assessment in schools meant that it was becoming easier for students to achieve top grades. So this was a system in which students could take home their GCSE coursework, and of course any parents who are interested in their child's progress will kind of step in and maybe have a look at a draft of an essay or maybe have a look at some coursework that they're doing and make suggestions. So the system had become a sort of game that was being played very, very well by parents, pupils and teachers alike. So it was felt that this reform was needed to put the emphasis on exams right at the end of the period rather than on coursework, and it was hoped that this would really separate the top students from those who were kind of playing the game, the coursework game, and getting lots of help outside of the examination hall. So we'll start by looking at the GCSEs, and I think Leslie has already explained very well what these are, but we'll look at these in a bit more detail. This is the current situation at GCSE level across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. So now, as I said, after these reforms, non-exam assessment is kept to an absolute minimum. So non-exam assessment would be any kind of practical work, so perhaps performance in music or drama, laboratory experiments, let's say, in science, or maybe design or artwork in an art studio. But other than that, non-exam assessment is now kept to an absolute minimum. So pupils are expected to study for a period of 2 years and then take all of the exams at the end of that 2-year period for the GCSEs. There are some minor differences. I know Leslie has already alluded to this across England, Wales and Northern Ireland at GCSE in terms of grading and exams. So if you look at England on the left-hand side, in England the examination boards are regulated by Ofqual, and the grades now go from 9 down to 1, with 9 being the highest grade. And for those of you who are familiar with the old grades at GCSE, that's the equivalent of sort of an A star star, so it's higher than the previous top grade available at this level. And as I say, this was designed so that you could really separate out those top students in the cohort. As I said, in England, all exams are now taken at the end of the course. So we describe these as linear qualifications rather than modular qualifications. And now if students are going in for a retake, they have to retake the whole lot. They can't just sort of cherry pick specific modules that they wanted to do better on. They have to retake the whole subject. In Wales and Northern Ireland, in general, students will still get the A star to G grades, but some of them, if they are taking GCSEs through English exam boards, will also have some 9 to 1 grades. So the situation we have currently, because we're sort of in the middle of a transition period from linear GCSEs, from modular GCSEs to the new linear GCSEs, is students across England, Wales and Northern Ireland receiving grades with a combination of number grades and letter grades. Obviously, in the next few years, that will be phased out and they'll just have the new number grades. But I'll give you an example later on of a transcript where a student has the combination of grades. So what actually are GCSEs? You'll notice that I refer to them as GCSEs with an S on the end, and I think Leslie was referring to them as the GCSE. GCSEs, I refer to them as plural because you actually study for multiple qualifications in all the different subjects that you choose to study. So the General Certificate for Secondary Education is taken at the end of 11 years of compulsory education. As Leslie has already said, the national curriculum is studied during Key Stage 4. Core subjects are English, Maths and Science, and then in addition to this, students choose the optional subjects that they want to study. Students follow the national curriculum in state schools, as Leslie has mentioned, and state schools are generally schools offered without charge, funded in whole or in part by taxation, so through paying tax. Private schools, also known as independent schools, charge fees to attend instead of being funded by the government. At private schools, pupils don't have to follow the national curriculum, but as Leslie said, because the vast majority of independent schools offer GCSE programs, which are dictated by the same exam boards, independent schools do generally roughly follow the national curriculum. And I think that's another difference between the UK and the US. I believe the curriculum is organised by state in the US. Here it's organised by the government, so it's a national curriculum. The independent or private sector educates about 6.5% of the total population, total number of school children in the UK. With the figure rising to more than 15% of pupils over the age of 16. So once students have finished their GCSEs and they're then looking at A-level, Many of them consider a private or an independent school to study for the A-levels, and that's really to give themselves the best possible chance of getting into university, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail later on. Just to note, the term public school, if you ever hear the term public school in the UK, that's often used to describe long-established sort of fee-charging private schools rather than state schools. And it's important not to confuse the term state with the US meaning of the term. So when we're talking about state schools in the UK, we're talking about the free schools which everyone can attend, which are funded by taxation. So the majority of students take 9 or 10 GCSEs, and that's absolutely fine for universities and employers. I myself have 9. There are students who take more. Just on this next slide, I've got a couple of headlines, which I found interesting. A boy aged 7 achieved his maths GCSE after his mum bought him a maths revision book in a charity shop. So this is just to demonstrate that there's no lower or upper age limit for anyone who wants to take a GCSE exam. You can enter and you can take that exam at any time. And also the second headline we've got here, it says Harun Tariq, the boy who got 46 A's in his exams. This is just to demonstrate that there's no limit to the number of GCSEs you can take. If you really, really want to show off and you really want to challenge yourself, you can enter yourself for as many GCSEs as you like. And there are almost 100, I think, available currently. So this individual was obviously a very talented young man, and he wanted to show the world how dedicated he was to his studies. So what's new with the GCSE reforms? Well, the main changes that you will notice include the new grading scale of 9 to 1. So assessment, as I said, is mainly by exam now, rather than in the past it was done by coursework. And we're looking at a linear course now with exams right at the end of 2 years. The content is seen to be more demanding, and again, this has been developed by the government and the exam boards to really try and raise standards in Britain. There will be courses designed for 2 years, and students take all of the exams at the end of the course. And there have been changes to the tiers. So in the past, we had exams at foundation tier and higher tier, and students would be entered for one or the other, depending on their ability. The government wanted to change that completely so that you could have one exam paper that was accessible for the whole range of students. And in theory, that's a great idea because it means kind of less admin for teachers, having to enter some students for foundation and some students for higher. But in practice, in many subjects, this simply wasn't appropriate. So you may still have some students entering exams at foundation tier, meaning that they can get a maximum grade of a 5, and some entering a higher tier, which means that they're they can access those top grades, grades 9 and 8. And as we've already said, there are opportunities for pupils to resit some of their exams if they're not happy with how they did, but in the past they could resit specific modules, and now they have to resit the whole GCSE. So pupils who are looking to resit exams have to be much more committed if they want to do so. If you look on the left, I've got a table here which shows the new grading structure of 9 to 1 against the current or old grading structure. As I said, pupils who are doing their GCSEs now are still in that awkward phase of receiving grades which are a mixture of the two, because the transition from linear to from modular to linear has been kind of a phased procedure. It hasn't we didn't just change all the subjects overnight. So we've got some students with a combination of number and letter grades. On the left, that table applies to England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And on the right, we're looking at the grading for the Scottish Nationals, Highers and Advanced Highers. The very beady-eyed amongst you might notice that in Scotland, it's just pass or fail for the Scottish Nationals, which is very, very different to the rest of the UK. But they do have letter grades at higher and advanced higher levels. So we'll talk a little bit about those qualifications towards the end of this presentation. As I said, here's an example of some exam results, and you can see that this individual has done his GCSEs in the core subjects of maths, English and science, and then he's also chosen geography, history, RE. RE is religious education, and also Spanish. So they've got a mixture of number and letter grades, and this pupil with 9s, A's and A stars is clearly an exceptional student. He's done very, very well. So it's not impossible to have this combination of number and letter grades whilst we're going through this transition. Leslie mentioned before the exam boards, so the examination boards and the external exams that pupils have to sit in the UK. So how does this system work? England, Wales and Northern Ireland have several exam boards, with schools and sixth form colleges able to freely choose between them on a subject by subject basis. Currently there are 6 exam boards available to state schools, and schools enter pupils for exams with the specific exam boards. And all of these boards are regulated by Ofqual in England and other relevant bodies in other parts of the UK. So in my experience, heads of departments in schools tend to choose the exam board they want to enter the students with based on certain deciding factors. Deciding factors could be the syllabus, so the sort of curriculum. To give you an example, if you were going to teach a Spanish course, you might look at the specific texts that a certain exam board dictates that they want students to study, because you might prefer to teach that text to the text specified by another exam board. Or you might look at the style of the examinations and think, which style of question will really suit my pupils, which style of exam will suit the pupils I've got in the classroom in front of me. Essentially, it's just a case of finding the best board for staff and students to optimise the results, because all the boards are regulated by Ofqual, so the level of challenge presented by each board should be exactly the same, and the choice of board shouldn't affect pupils' grades. I can understand that this must be a very baffling system if you're not from the UK, but it generally works well, and we've accepted it as the norm here in the UK, and it's nice for teachers to have options. They can pick up the syllabus from AQA, they can pick up the syllabus from EdExcel, and because there's competition here, all the exam boards are striving to put out the best syllabus, the best exams, to have the most rigorous exam marking, and to provide the most helpful feedback for teachers. So because there's this sort of competition between the exam boards, it really helps to drive up the quality of the syllabuses provided and also of the exams. So now let's look at the second stage of specialisation in a bit more detail. At 16, pupils usually choose their A-level options, and the A obviously stands for advanced level, as Leslie has already mentioned. So currently across England, Wales and Northern Ireland, this is the current situation. The grades go from A to E for AS levels and A star to E for A levels. Again, non-exam assessment is kept down to a minimum, but in subjects such as drama, design, art, music, science to a lesser extent, you need to have that practical element. You need to have some assessment which takes place in the classroom, where you can physically observe the student doing something. The content, as Leslie has mentioned, of an AS is approximately half that of an A level. So if a student comes to you with AS levels, essentially what they're presenting to you is half of an A level. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated, because England is now doing something totally different to Wales and Northern Ireland, and we're all doing something different to Scotland. It gets a little bit complicated here. So in England now, on the left-hand side, AS levels don't contribute to A-level results. In the past, AS levels made up around 40% of the total A-level grade, but now there's been decoupling in England, and AS levels don't count towards the A-level in England. You can take an AS as a sort of standalone qualification, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but the AS level is now not part of the A-level in England. In Wales and Northern Ireland, they've got the sort of older system with 40% of the AS counting towards the overall A level. So the AS is part of the A level in Wales and Northern Ireland. Hopefully you're all still following me at this point. I understand that it is a little bit confusing. It's just the way we like to be a bit wacky in the United Kingdom. So A levels are upper secondary awards. So this is post GCSE, post the first kind of compulsory set of exams that we take here in the UK. Students studying at this level only study the subjects that they choose. So if you remember from my example, I chose to study Spanish, French and media. Most students study 3 because universities are just looking for 3 A levels, and many higher education courses are looking for specific A levels or combinations of grades, and I'll give you some examples in just a second. Once a student has completed their GCSEs, they might choose to stay at the same school, or they might move schools, perhaps to an independent school if they weren't in one already, to study their AS or A levels in their chosen subjects. Some will go to a sixth form college, as Leslie's mentioned, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. So let's look at this typical university entrance offer. This is from the University of Manchester, and this is for a Bachelor of Arts in History. And you can see that it's a 3-year bachelor degree, and in order to gain a place on this course, what they're looking for is for the student to have achieved 3 A's or AAB to include history. Now, 3 A's, AAB is quite a challenging offer. Remember that A star at A level is the top grade, followed by A, followed by B. So in order to get a place on this particular course at Manchester, the BA in history, a student would need to have achieved a minimum of AAB at A level. So they might have achieved an A in English, an A in history and a B in geography, let's say. But it must include history, because obviously when we go to university in the UK, we want those first year students to be mini specialists in the subject that they've chosen. So it's a requirement that they've done history at GCSE. It's a requirement that they've done history at A level in order to study history at a sort of specialised level in the first year of university. This is another example of a typical university offer, this time from Cardiff University, and this is for a medical degree. So we're looking at students looking for a career in medicine. This is 3A grades, again at A2 level. A2 basically means A level. It's a hangover really from the old system where we had AS and A2, and it refers to that second year of advanced level study. So students must offer 3 A2 level subjects, which should include chemistry and biology. So again, we're looking at this system which asks students to specialise at GCSE and then again at A level, and then when they go to university. So they must have A levels in chemistry and biology in order to gain a place to study medicine at Cardiff University. Just a note here where it says general studies. General studies is an A level that you might see. I myself have an A level in general studies, but I didn't actually attend any lessons really for it. General studies is sort of a study skills A level, which gives you an insight into how to research, how to create a bibliography, how to reference things. It's a general studies course which equips you with study skills before going to university. But because it's deemed as something that's quite easy, I don't want to sort of put a downer on general studies, but many universities won't accept general studies as one of the A levels when they're offering students places on courses at university. So you can see here it says general studies, critical thinking and further maths are not acceptable at A2 level. So in the same way that I have A levels in Spanish, French and media studies, I also have one in general studies, but I don't tend to mention it because it's viewed by many as a sort of extra and not one of the main important A levels. Here's another example from the University of the West of England in Bristol. Now this one's interesting because it's in architecture, and architecture is not something that you can study at A-level in the UK. So you can see here that there are no specific subjects required for this one. You just need to have at least 2 A-levels, and it says that A-level general studies and AS level will count towards the overall tariff, and that tariff refers to UCAS points. Now, UCAS is the University and Colleges Admissions Service here in the UK, and it's the system that we use for applying to study at university here. Tariff points are used to calculate a student's suitability for a course, and all kinds of things can get you UCAS points or tariff points. So your A-levels all count to get you points, but you can also count things like dance qualifications, or if you've done a personal training qualification in the gym, or you've got plumbing or plastering courses. So you can count lots of things that really just paint a picture of how suitable a student is for a course. It's not always just based on academia. And this next one is the most local university to the office where we are here in Cheltenham. This one is, again, hotel, resort and events management, which you wouldn't be able to study at A-level in the UK. And we've got the tariff information. If you wanted to go on the University of Gloucestershire website, you can have a look at the tariff information. So how many points would I need to get a place on this course? Or we're looking at an offer of B, B, C at A-level. So it's quite clear that it's much easier to get a place on this course, Hotel, Resort and Events Management at the University of Gloucestershire, than it is to get a place on a Bachelor of Arts in History at the University of Manchester, because the grades required at A-level are lower in this case. So what's new at A-level? Again, assessment will be mainly by exam, with other types of assessment used only when necessary. AS and A-levels will be assessed at the end of either course. AS assessments typically take place after 1 year's study, and A-levels after 2. The courses will no longer be divided into modules, and there will be no exams in January as there were previously. In the previous system, students could do exams in January and in June, and they could retake modules as many times as they wanted to try and get the best possible grade, and the exam boards would always honour the best grade. So when I spoke before about students kind of playing the game and playing the system, the new reforms have really tried to put a stop to that. AS and A-levels will be decoupled, and I'll speak a bit about that in a moment. And again, just like the GCSE, the content for the new A-levels has been reviewed and updated according to research into some of the most successful education systems across the world in order to make the qualifications more challenging. So I've spoken briefly about decoupling. Essentially, AS levels were in the past one step or one stage towards gaining access to higher education, and A levels, as I've said, are our upper secondary exit level qualification, which gives students in-depth knowledge and sort of very specialist knowledge in certain subject areas. Previously, a student would study AS level in the first year of study and then progress onto A2, the second year of that A-level study. And the results from both of these would be combined to give an overall A-level grade. AS and A-levels in England are now being decoupled, meaning that AS results will no longer count towards an A-level in the way they did previously. AS levels can be designed by exam boards to be taught alongside the first year of A levels, although this has not been possible for many schools, and the uptake of sort of standalone AS levels is decreasing rapidly. So I suspect that over the next few years you'll start to see the decline of the AS level. The idea behind it was to, as it says on the slide, reduce the treadmill of exams. So students went from doing GCSEs at age 16 to AS levels at age 17 to A2 exams at age 18. And it was seen as a sort of never-ending treadmill of exams, revision. So by removing one of those stages, the idea was that students wouldn't just be constantly examined all the time, but in reality, many students have reported really feeling intense pressure at the end of the 2 years, because obviously how they perform at this level dictates what they can study at university and where they can study, as we've seen in the examples of university offers. The system was designed to allow for synoptic learning, so pupils making connections across the whole subject area rather than modular learning, where they were just kind of focusing on one topic at a time, revising, doing the exam, moving on to the next one, revising, doing the exam, etc. But because of the way that the curriculum has changed, in a way it's reduced the breadth of study in many subjects. So it hasn't quite worked out in a way I think the government intended. But AS levels are still attractive to some students, in particular lower ability students who might kind of start studying in the sixth form, they start their A-level study and then realise that it's really too challenging for them to go on to A2, so they'll just finish off with an AS. AS levels offer students a chance to do an elective. So if you wanted to study medicine, let's say we looked at that course, that medicine course in Cardiff, you obviously need to study chemistry, biology, and let's say, for argument's sake, maths. But you might be a really keen linguist and you might want to keep up your languages. So you might do a French AS level just to make sure that you keep up with your French language skills. They're also popular with students who were originally intending to take the full A level, but they sort of look unlikely to pass towards the end of that first year. So they might just do the AS and then step off the bus at that point. Now we're finally getting to look at hires and advanced hires, which are the equivalent of the A level in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Hires are the most common qualification for entry to higher education in Scotland, and if you are Scottish, higher education is free in Scotland. 4 or 5 hires are normally taken in secondary school or at college, and they're studied in considerable depth, so it's a lot like the A level in that sense. Hires and advanced hires will involve coursework and final examinations, and hires are normally needed for entry to university in Scotland, as I've already said. Advanced hires are almost a level above A level. They're aimed at students who've passed the hires, and they're usually taken, again, at the very end of upper secondary education. These extend the skills and knowledge gained at higher level, and these are additional qualifications that are not required for university entry, but they are useful because they really demonstrate that this student is somebody who's kind of gone above and beyond just the basic sort of higher level. Since 2004, advanced hires have been graded on a scale of A to D, and they are designed to bridge the gap between school and university education. So they make that change between class-based learning that we see at secondary school and then the sort of independent learning that we see at university level. Advanced hires can give direct entry into the second year of university in Scotland, but many students don't take this route. They prefer to start in the first year with all the other first year students, and why wouldn't you? You want to have that shared experience with the other freshers, as we say. I believe we say freshmen in the US, or we say freshers here, so they all want to start at the same time. Some of the more prestigious universities across the UK, for example, Oxford, Cambridge, Durham, they might consider more favourably for entry those Scottish students who have studied the advanced hires. So that's something to maybe take into consideration if you're looking at a Scottish pupil who's got the advanced hires. Maybe that's something you might want to bear in mind. Just a quick word on vocational qualifications. Traditionally, A-levels provide access to university study in the UK. However, more and more frequently, we're seeing that BTECs, which are vocational qualifications, and NVQs are being accepted for undergraduate entry. Now, this of course depends on the degree subject that the individual is planning to study. For example, it's unlikely that a student will go on to do a humanities degree if they've got an NVQ in animal husbandry or travel and tourism. It's unlikely that they would sort of switch vocations, as it were. But if the vocational qualification that they have closely relates to the topic that they want to study at university, some universities are now considering these qualifications for entry to degree programs. I've mentioned the term the sixth form quite a few times, and I can only imagine how baffling that is, because it's also referred to in the UK as years 12 and years 13. Now, the sixth form is a term often used to describe these last 2 years of secondary education. Secondary education in the UK starts in year 7, and this used to be referred to as the first year or the first form. GCSEs are taken after 5 years in year 11, also known as the fifth form. So the next year after that is the sixth form, and this name has kind of stuck across the board in the UK. Many private schools still refer to the year groups as forms. That's quite traditional, it's quite formal. But this term, the sixth form, has really just stuck in the UK, and it's used to describe the period when students are studying those A levels, that 2 years at the end of upper secondary. And this could take place at a school, it can take place in a sixth form college or a sixth form centre. I would say the majority of students just stay on at the school where they've done their GCSEs. You know, they know the school, they know the teachers, they've got their friends. So it's quite possible for most students to just stay on at the same school, but many do change. And as I said before, some even go from a state school to a private school just to give themselves the best possible chance of doing really well at A level in those last 2 years. I understand that we've got about 10 minutes now for some questions, but I just wanted to show you this document. It's probably very, very difficult to see on the slide there. This sort of document is called Qualifications Can Cross Boundaries. If you want to make a note and Google it, it's called Qualifications Can Cross Boundaries. And it should help you to understand the different qualifications across the UK and how they compare to one another. It's interesting to note that England, Wales and Northern Ireland all base their frameworks on 8 levels, as you can see here, and the Scottish one has 12. And you can see here we've got the Highers and the A levels, AS levels, all sitting at around the same place. So that's a useful document that you might want to look up. Also, at the end of the PowerPoint, I've included other useful links if you're looking into education in the UK, and hopefully lots of the answers to your questions you'll be able to find using these links. So that brings me to the end of my section. I'll hand back over to Mike.
Thank you very much, Colette. And luckily there are no fire alarms currently, so we'll hope it stays that way. We did have one question that came in, but you sort of answered it right towards the end there. Someone asked if you could say a little bit more about the sixth form, but you had that whole slide about that. So unless that individual, Anna, if you have some follow-up questions to that, then we'll wait for some more questions to come in. So now we have the sort of dead air time. Oh, there's another one. Jennifer Atkins asks, are the reforms also in place for the international GCSEs and CIE A levels? And I would assume that you can answer that, Colette.
I suspect so. I think I would have to look into that in more detail to see if the IGCSE has been reformed in the same way. But I suspect so, because these are governmental reforms dictating what students are doing across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. So they must have some say over the IGCSE programmes as well. But if you wanted to email me that question, I can certainly look into it in a lot more detail and get back to you with some information on how the reforms have affected the IGCSE.
Awesome. And then we got another one here. will the 9-point scale be transferring to the A's or A levels as well?
That's a good question. I don't believe so. At the moment, the 9-to-1 scale is just for GCSE level. The A star grade at A level is in itself a fairly recent change. So the A star level, the A star grade at A level wasn't available when I was at school, for example. So they've brought in that A star grade at A level to really separate the top students, to really show to universities when you've got an exceptional candidate on your hands. So I don't think that the 9-to-1 grade system is as necessary at A level as it was at GCSE, because you don't have so many students achieving that top grade. As I say, the 9-to-1 was partly brought in really to separate the men from the boys, as it were. And at A level, there aren't any plans at the moment to change that letter grading system.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Leslie, we have a question for you. You mentioned that the GCSEs are the U.S. qualification for university admission. Previously, in an ACRO event, we were told that GCSEs were not equivalent to U.S. high school, and students need to have completed at least AS level to be eligible for admission to a U.S. university. Would you mind offering some more insight on this?
Sure, thanks for that question. You know, as you may or may not know, there isn't a government body in the United States who determines equivalencies for us. So it's a little bit of a free-for-all. US universities can make their own admissions decisions. Generally, these are based on accepted best practices in our field. And I actually haven't heard, I have not heard what you're referring to there with GCSEs plus AS levels. ACRO's standpoint has always been that GCSEs, as long as they represent that breadth of subjects that I mentioned, are appropriate preparation for admission at the freshman level in the US. And just in case you're wondering what that breadth of subjects was, I'll repeat it. That was language, mathematics, lab science, social science, and a fifth academic subject. And so if those areas are covered in a student's GCSE exams with appropriate grades, the generally accepted practice in the US has been to admit to freshman standing. Now, this depends also on all kinds of other factors, including what your admission standards at your university are for all students. If you're more rigorous, you may be looking for more AS levels, but sort of the basic is just GCSEs with those 5 subject areas covered with appropriate grades.
And if I could just add to what Leslie's saying there about the breadth of subjects studied at that level, obviously in the UK, the core subjects are English language, English literature, mathematics and sciences, and that would cover physics, biology and chemistry. And then usually when students choose their options, we refer to them as GCSE options, they are usually encouraged to choose from the other areas that you've mentioned, Leslie. So often you'll find that students do have that same broad curriculum kind of under their belt by the time they finish those GCSEs.
Thank you very much. And just as a heads up, we still have 7 questions, but just about by my watch, about 2 minutes left. So we'll try to get at least 1, maybe 2 more in here. But I'll email your questions that are pending still to Colette and to Leslie, and they can answer your questions offline. So Candace asks, how will the change to linear exams at the end impact university admission? We usually look for the final certificate for the final GCSE, AS, or A2 grade, so not sure it will impact us directly.
Yeah, I don't think you'll notice any changes in that sense. You'll still be looking for the final GCSE grades and the final sort of certificate from the different exam board. The only difference, I suppose, with the GCSEs that you'll really notice is those number grades, so from 9 to 1 rather than A star to E. you'll still be looking for the same documentation from the exam boards as you did previously. It's just that the reforms have represented a huge change to the way in which students are taught and assessed. And obviously the grading system is one of the changes as well. But in terms of the actual documents and what you're looking for, you're still looking for the grades, the transcripts, the certificates from the exam boards. You're just keeping an eye out for those number grades, and don't be phased if you get a candidate with a combination of number grades and letter grades. As I said before, that's just while we're in this transition phase.
Thank you. And we have seconds before noon Eastern here. So I know that Colette, you have to leave pretty promptly at 5.
I do, yeah.
Yep. So I think that'll have to probably be our last question. But again, if your question wasn't gotten to during this live session, then I will email those to Leslie and Colette, and they'll connect with you all offline. And if they're willing to share those answers publicly, I can also send them along in the follow-up email to this webinar. So with that, I guess we'll sign off. Thanks to our presenters, and thanks for all of you for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye. Enjoy your day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.